Why some places drain you instantly and others calm your brain. There is a moment that most people overlook when they move through the world, whether they are traveling somewhere new or simply walking through a familiar street. And it is a moment so subtle that it often passes without conscious awareness, even though the body has already reacted long before the mind begins to form an explanation. It is the moment where something inside you shifts almost instantly, where your breathing becomes slightly more shallow or unexpectedly deeper, where your shoulders either tighten or begin to soften, where a quiet sense of pressure appears in your chest or, just as quietly, disappears again. And what is remarkable about this moment is not only how quickly it happens, but how consistently it repeats across different environments without most people ever fully noticing the pattern. You arrive somewhere, perhaps a city you have never been to before, a street that looked calm in photos, or even a place you return to regularly, and within a very short period of time, sometimes within seconds, your body has already registered something that your conscious mind has not yet named, and this reaction is often misinterpreted as mood, as tiredness, or as something internal, when in reality it is a direct response to the structure of the environment itself. Because some places have the ability to drain you almost immediately, creating a subtle but persistent sense of cognitive and physical load, while other places seem to calm your system without effort, allowing your thoughts to slow just enough to feel manageable again. And this difference is not random. It is not psychological in the way most people assume, and it is certainly not a question of discipline or resilience. It is, much more precisely, a question of how your nervous system interacts with what could be described as the stimulus architecture of a place. Every environment you enter is composed of multiple overlapping layers that your brain is continuously processing, including layers of sound that may be constant or unpredictable, layers of movement that may be fluid or fragmented, layers of visual information that may be simple and structured or dense and demanding, and layers of social unpredictability that require you to track subtle cues, adjust your behavior, and remain alert in ways that are rarely acknowledged consciously. In environments where these layers are dense, fast-changing, and poorly structured, your brain is required to perform a continuous series of micro-adjustments, constantly filtering, predicting, recalibrating, and orienting itself in response to shifting stimuli. And while each of these processes may seem insignificant on its own, together they create a steady output of cognitive and nervous system effort that accumulates over time in a way that is often felt but rarely understood. In contrast, there are environments where these same layers are more coherent, where movement follows predictable patterns, where visual input is organized in a way that does not require constant interpretation, where sound does not compete for attention, but instead recedes into the background, and in these spaces the brain is able to reduce its level of active processing, not because it is disengaged, but because it is no longer required to continuously resolve complexity. This difference becomes particularly important if your nervous system is more sensitive or more open in the way it processes information, which is often the case for individuals with ADHD or generally high sensory awareness, because your system is not filtering less input due to a deficit, but rather allowing more input to enter awareness, creating a richer but also more demanding perceptual experience. This means that what is considered a normal level of stimulation for others can already represent a significantly higher load for you, not because you are less capable, but because your brain is engaging with more detail, more nuance, and more simultaneous information than is typically acknowledged in standard models of attention and regulation. As a result, environments that are designed around speed, density, and constant interaction can begin to create a form of fatigue that is not immediately recognized as environmental, but instead interpreted as personal limitation, lack of discipline, or insufficient resilience, when in fact the underlying issue is a mismatch between the demands of the environment and the processing style of the nervous system. If you begin to observe different cities through this lens, the pattern becomes increasingly clear because some places are structured in a way that inherently increases cognitive load through constant movement, high visual density, unpredictable interactions, and overlapping soundscapes, while others are structured around clarity, rhythm, and spatial coherence, allowing the nervous system to orient itself more easily and maintain a more stable internal state. Cities such as Lucerne, Copenhagen, or smaller alpine towns often feel calmer not because they lack activity, but because their activity is organized in a way that reduces unnecessary complexity, where movement flows rather than collides, where visual lines guide rather than overwhelm, and where the environment itself supports a more regulated experience without requiring continuous effort from the individual. What is equally important, however, is that this effect is not fixed to specific locations, because the same place can feel entirely different depending on factors such as time of day, light conditions, weather, and the density of people moving through it, all of which alter the stimulus architecture in ways that directly influence how your nervous system responds. A street that feels calm and spacious in the early morning, when movement is slow and sound is minimal, can feel overwhelming in the afternoon when the same physical space is filled with noise, speed, and unpredictability, and this shift is often experienced as a personal fluctuation in energy or mood, even though the underlying cause is environmental change. And this is also the point where something practical becomes available to you, because once you begin to recognize that your reactions are not random, you can start to work with them in a much more intentional way. Instead of moving through environments passively, you begin to read them. You begin to notice how many layers of sound are present at the same time, whether movement around you is smooth or constantly interrupting itself, whether your eyes have a place to rest or are forced to scan continuously, and whether your body feels like it can settle or needs to stay alert. And once you can see these elements, even in a simple way, you gain the ability to make small, precise adjustments that have a disproportionate effect on how you feel. For example, you can begin to choose routes that reduce unnecessary input, even if they are slightly longer, because a quieter side street with more predictable movement can require significantly less processing than a busy main road. You can position yourself differently in spaces, sitting in a way that gives you a sense of orientation and reduces the amount of visual scanning your brain has to do, which immediately lowers cognitive load without any effort. You can begin to notice when sound is layered and competing and either reduce it, step away from it, or balance it with more controlled input, such as calm music or silence, instead of allowing constant unpredictability to dominate your environment. You can also begin to work with timing, choosing to enter certain environments earlier or later in the day when they are less dense, and leaving before your system reaches a point where recovery becomes more difficult. And perhaps most importantly, you can begin to recognize the early signals of overload, not as something to ignore or push through, but as useful information that allows you to respond before your energy drops significantly. None of these adjustments require perfection, and they do not require you to withdraw from life, but they do create a different relationship with your environment, one where you are no longer passively absorbing everything around you, but actively shaping the conditions your nervous system is exposed to. Over time, this has a very real impact on your overall energy, because energy is not only determined by what you do, but by how much your system is required to process throughout the day, and whether it is given enough space to return to a more regulated state. After the age of 40, this becomes even more relevant, because your capacity to compensate for constant input decreases, and environments that are slightly misaligned begin to have a much more noticeable effect on your clarity, your recovery, and your baseline sense of well-being. From a longevity perspective, this is not a small detail, because chronic overstimulation creates a continuous demand on your nervous system that is closely linked to stress-related processes in the body. And over time, this influences not only how you feel day to day, but how sustainable your energy is in the long term. So instead of asking how to become more resilient in environments that drain you, a more useful question becomes how to reduce unnecessary load, how to create more coherence in your surroundings, and how to give your nervous system regular access to conditions where it does not have to work as hard. And when you begin to approach your life in this way, something shifts. Your sensitivity no longer feels like a problem that needs to be managed. It begins to feel like a form of intelligence, a way of perceiving subtle differences that most people move past and using that perception to make better decisions in real time. You are no longer reacting blindly to your environment. You are responding with awareness. And that awareness changes how places feel, how your energy moves, and how sustainable your daily life becomes. Because you are not bad at handling life. You are responding with a high level of precision to environments that were never designed for the way your brain processes the world. And once you begin to see that clearly, you can start to shape your life in a way that feels less like constant effort and more like quiet alignment, where calm and energy are no longer something you have to force, but something that naturally emerges when your nervous system is supported. And if this way of understanding your experience resonates with you, if you are beginning to see your environment differently and recognize patterns that were not visible before, then you will find more of this here, because this space is designed to help you build a calmer, more structured way of living with a complex brain, not by adding more noise, but by creating clarity, depth, and a way of moving through the world that actually works for you. And you are very welcome to stay.